Okay, so what we're gonna examine today is one of the things that I find the most interesting. In you could, if you were getting highfalutin, you say it's the epistemological problem, what we mean by knowing, and we're going to really have a look at and unpack Swami Dayananda's understanding of subjectivity. All right, because he says that the primary issue is the reduction of subjectivity, but in order to reduce it, we have to know what it is. And the problem with subjectivity is it happens without our knowledge and awareness. In other words, when we're being subjective, we have no idea we're being subjective. This is the problem. And so and subjectivity is our human being default. So here there's a huge problem, but it can't be seen. But through the grace of the teaching, it makes it very clear. And particularly, I've read lots of books about this before Dayananda, but he was the one that really just made it simple and able to see. So we're going to start, first of all, with the snake and the rope story so that we know what we're talking about. Now, what they say is that in total darkness, you can't make a mistake, right? In total darkness. So we're not talking about complete ignorance, but in total dark. But when it's it's not daylight, and you can't make a mistake in daylight, right? But it's in the middle. Okay, so it's evening, it's dark, so you can still see forms, right? And you think the rope in the corner is a snake, right? Now, what's happened is that unknowing to you, as far as you are concerned, you've got this judgment. There is a snake in the corner, right? But you're not aware that it's a judgment, because our judgments are so fast they turn into experience. So what happens is I'm looking at an experience which is a judgment, a notion in me being projected as experience. So I'm looking at a snake. As far as I'm concerned, I'm having the experience of a snake. Now, this is really interesting, because this is what Dayananda calls, because you are seeing it, it is there. Because you are seeing it, it is there. Now this shows the nature of what subjectivity is. It's notional, but it's not like, oh yeah, I've got lots of wrong thinking. No. This is what you call a delusion. It's what you call a delusion. So what happens is I'm enclosed in a way of seeing that is entirely subjective, but I'm experiencing my experiences as totally objective. All right, so when I'm looking at a tree outside, that's what Dayananda calls objectivity. Because it's there, I am seeing it. It's what St. Thomas Aquinas calls truth, when your mind conforms with thing. So that when I'm looking at the thing and my mind is conforming with the thing, I'm seeing truthfully, right? But the thing is that when it comes to subjectivity, we're just not aware of it. We're having an experience, and we're giving the experience the same ontological value as looking at a tree. We just genuinely, and the problem is you can't see delusion from within the delusion, because it's this thing, this that beautiful Plato distinction between appearance and reality. We don't. It appears to be true that there is a snake in the corner, and that way of seeing, it's not just simply a way of seeing that exists in my head. When I'm in a way of seeing, that manifests as a way of being. In this case, I'm scared shitless. Do you see what I mean? So it's not like, oh, I'm just having a thought here. It's not like, the whole, the cognitive restructuring psychologists, they want to restructure your, we're not talking about that. We're talking about literally, and how Dayananda puts it, he says, you become the thinking and the thinking becomes you. You become the thinking and the thinking becomes you. Now, so what we have when we're looking at subjectivity, we are looking at a way of seeing in which we're oblivious to the fact that what we're looking at is untrue. Is untrue. It doesn't seem that way though, right? Now, who here has ever had the thought about another human being that they're an SOB?
Yeah.
Okay.
Occasionally.
A judgmental thought about another human being. Oh, they're a dick, or they're whatever you want to, whatever term. Do you see what I mean? When you have, when you're upset with someone and you're full of ill will and you're looking at them and you're looking at them as if they are a something, aren't they? A notion. We don't know we're looking at a notion. As far as we're concerned, do I have the understanding that I'm having a thought that this person in front of me is an SOB, or am I experiencing an SOB? Yep.
Does that also apply when you're looking at a person and you're saying, gee, they're really nice?
Can be, yep, absolutely, yep.
Could be.
Hate to say that, but yep. Okay, but so what happens is because what happens is this subjectivity is the generation or the arising of an experience that we take to be true. Are we all clear on that? Now, this is all pervasive. Like, who here has ever had an idea about themselves that they're a reasonably good person? Right? That's a comforting notion, isn't it? Right?
Yes.
We like that one, don't we, Steve? Right? Mm-hmm. Now, but the fact of the matter is, Dayananda says every notion you have about yourself, positive or negative, is not true. It's delusional. The life and being you are is not a notion. Right? It's not a notion. If, Stephen, is my idea of you the life and being that you are?
No.
But can I think that it is from my side of the fence?
Yeah, you're deluded.
Yeah. Oh, who invited this bugger? All right. Anyway, Bob, it must be hard to sit beside someone like so deluded as that would accuse me of having any delusion. Now, so what happens is every thought I have about myself, I think that when I'm having a thought about myself, I'm what they call thinking about myself. Would that be true? Who's ever thought of it? Who's ever engaged in thinking about themselves? Mm-hmm. Right? Now, it looks like that we're thinking about ourselves. Would you say that's true? We are thinking about ourselves. In other words, we have a picture or a notion in our mind of ourselves, and then we look at it and we go, I'm not sure I like that. Or it might be, I am so impressed with that I can't believe myself. It doesn't matter which it is, but when I'm thinking about myself, what I'm thinking about isn't true. It's because I am seeing it. It is there. Okay? Now, this is quite heavy, really, because the thing is that, again, when I'm thinking about myself, as far as I'm concerned, I'm thinking about myself. Now, there's always a dualism. Me, the thinker, looking at the object, isn't it? Always. The me who's thinking. Me as a thinker, right? So what happens is now you might think, well, this is, it doesn't really have an effect. Who here has sometimes felt that they're a bit of a loser sometimes? Who's ever felt that? Right? Now, that is a symbolic representation to yourself about yourself. Would you say that's true? A loser. It's a concept. It's a notion. So you look at yourself, I'm a loser. But mind you, when you become that very thinking, the thinking becomes you and you become the thinking. That's what Dayananda says, right? Does it feel like it's real? You actually feel the pain and the suffering of that? Because the way you see is the way you be. That's an existential fact. The way, at any one moment, the way you are seeing is your way of being. They're not separate. When you are angry with someone, you've got a notion about them that they're an SOB, that they're worthy of punishment, that they're being unfair, whatever it is. But do you see how these are all notions, symbolic notions? And then what happens is, and when I'm seeing that way, like anger is a way of seeing. It's not an object. We all, in the West, we make it into an object. We have a thing called anger management. Oh, you've got this thing called anger. Oh my goodness, yes, there's anger here, and I've got to manage it because it's always causing me to act. Who's ever heard of that one? Right? But no. Dayananda says the problem is centered on you. It's not the problem isn't centered on anger's making you angry. Okay. What happens is you are seeing in a certain way. This person is an SOB. And everything about you becomes that thinking. Your way of being, you embody that way of seeing. This is why Vedanta works, by the way. You see what I mean? Because
so you're saying that you get lost in the associations.
Yes, but you don't see that. If I say
you do,
to
that's
you,
what happens.
Yeah, exactly. Amy, if I say to you, what is your name? Tell me what happens. What is your name? There's
no Amy here. You mean Emilia?
Amelia, sorry. No, is it Amy? Amy.
Emilia.
I can't hear you, Amelia. I can't hear you. Can you yep.
Okay.
Are you Amy?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, why am I saying Emilia then?
Because that's for short. Amy's the shortened version.
It's the same. It's the same name.
I got it mixed up last week, but not this week. Okay, I've been practicing in my mind so I don't make the mistake.
It's
Amanda.
the same name. Okay.
Okay. All right.
So we'll call you Amy then.
Okay.
The short version.
So when I say to you, "What's your name?" What happens to you, Amy?
I suppose that ideas about it.
Yeah, you have the name Amy just pops up. Now, that's very useful for our functional living. Would you agree that it's useful?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's useful. But then the problem is, though, this mechanism of subjectivity, what happens is I look at myself and then up pops ideas. But I don't see the ideas. I look at myself and I go, ooh. Or I get elated. Oh, am I good or am I good? Or I get deflated. Right? But I think I'm looking at myself. But what happens is, as soon as I so-called look at myself, there's a reaction, and then there's another reaction, then there's another reaction. They're all notional, but every notion carries with it a way of being. Does that make sense?
Yes.
A way of being. So if I go, oh my God, I'm just such a deadbeat, right? I'm not even aware I'm thinking about myself. I'm just experiencing myself as a deadbeat. I become the thinking becomes me. You with me? So when I look at myself, there's no such thing as looking at yourself. Do you see what I mean? You're not looking at yourself. You can look at behavior, can't I? I can look at behavior. I'm acting in a very unkind way. That's objective because it's there, I'm seeing it. But the idea that I'm a jerk because I'm acting that way, that's not true. That's just not true. That's a mirage. So what we're talking about here is when you're in subjectivity, everything that you are looking at is untrue, but you don't see it. So when I look at myself, who here has ever engaged in rumination about themselves? Right? But you're not looking at yourself. You're involved in what Dayananda calls subjectivity. No one has explained subjectivity like him, by the way. I've never read any book. I've read really complicated books. I mean, I read, what was that book? It was an interesting book. I've forgotten. Anyway, but it was a Zen book. It was very, symbolic. They talked about all of this, but it was so complex, do you know what I mean? I couldn't really get it. You know what I mean? This is way back. So when I look at myself, what happens is I see myself acting in a certain way, and then up pops this way of seeing. I see the emotional state that might be there, which is a fact. But then I look at it, and the looking at it is a reaction. Oh my God, I'm pressed again. Right? So constantly, just like, what's your name? Bede. It's constantly coming into operation when I just simply look at so-called this activity of looking at myself. Now, what about when we're faced with looking at people who have different political views than us? Right? Right? You know what I mean? So when we're looking at those bloody MAGA people, or we're looking at those left-wing Democrat people, do you know what I mean? Again, am I looking at people? No, I'm not looking at people. I'm looking at my thought about people. But I won't see that. As far as I'm concerned, I will feel completely certain that I am looking at reality. Now, Dayananda said something once to me when we were talking. He said to me, we are reality people. Isn't it interesting? The Vedanta, we are reality people, which suggests that reality in and of itself is therapeutic. Reality lifts us out of subjectivity. But if we think that we don't suffer from the disease, it's very, I can have a thought. I'm not subjective much. I see a whole lot of people around me that are pretty subjective. Yeah. When I'm looking like that, will I feel pretty good about myself? Of course I will, because I'm in good standing. I'm slightly better than these ignorant people around me. But I'm being delusional, because everybody has notions about themselves that fortify themselves against seeing themselves as the way they are. We have lovely self-flattering notions. Who here has ever experienced having a self-flattering view of themselves? It's unmistakable, because you will become inflated. You can't help it. Am I good or am I good? Right? The problem is these lovely pictures tend to get interfered with, don't they? Let's say I imagine I'm unlike other people. I'm a very honest person, and I always tell the truth, right? And then we become aware of the notion that maybe we're bragging a little bit. And we sort of minimize it, don't we? We get away. But we're living in a subjective world. And this subjectivity is a way of being, absolutely. It doesn't exist in my head. When I'm angry, is that existing in my head, or is it just expressing itself all over the place? When I'm angry, my tone of voice, my facial expressions, my manner. There was a very good Catholic saint by the name of Saint Hilliard. He said, being is declarative. It always declares itself. Being declares itself. And in the sense of subjectivity, it declares itself at any one moment. And you see, this is why there's no real change in us, because what happens is we think the problem is what we're being, but in actual fact, our problem is what we're seeing. The problem is what we are seeing. Because I'm seeing it, it is there. So when we look at the world, so what happens is, from our past experience, we have built up notions about ourselves, about the world, and about people. And they become fairly fixed, by the way, by the time we're 6, actually. And then from that background, we then build up more. So these notions or ontological assumptions, you know what I mean, the reality assumptions, are in the background, waiting to be triggered. And so when I look at a present experience, what happens is I associate, this is what you're talking about, Sylvia, I associate the present experience with past experiences, and then I come to a judgment at what I'm looking at. Now, this is extremely important, otherwise I couldn't get home, right? But when it comes to subjectivity, it means that I am not aware. There's no awareness here. So what happens is, it's so fast that what happens is I'm just constantly seeing in a certain way. But that seeing is a reaction of the past. And I'm now being that seeing. When I look at the world, I go, it sucks, it's hard, it's stroking. You know, you can have all sorts of notions. The world is a beautiful place. Now, what happens is psychologists think, oh, when I say, oh, the world is a beautiful place and I feel good, they'll think, well, that's being nice and positive, right? It's still delusional. Okay, it will. They think it's positive because you do feel uplifted when you see so-called positively. So when you're positively delusional, everything's good. But it's still delusion. Because I am seeing it, it is there. All right, we're all tracking so far on this, right? So what we have is we have a tremendous problem here. And this is why psychotherapy doesn't work and all of this stuff. You know, some people think if you change people the way they think, then they'll feel better. Have you heard? Who's ever heard of that one? Changing the way you think. That's just replacing one notion with another. Now, it is true that if you've got a reality-based psychotherapist who tries to get you to think in realistic ways, it will help you in your functional world. You won't be as exaggerated. Do you know what I mean? If you understand, for example, that it's not that my wife is a such and such, it's just that she's said or done something I don't like. That's realistic. That helps because that's true. So reality is therapeutic even on the functional level. But to be released from subjectivity is of a higher order. It's different. You see, I can manipulate. See, what happens is I'm only aware in what the early Christians called, you know, natural man or carnal man or whatever they want. What happens is that you're aware of the sensory experiences and you're aware of your thoughts and reactions about those sensory experiences. And you take your thoughts and reactions, in other words, you take the state of being, anger, for example, as your very life and being. You take it as your very life and being. And then so I feel how high, that's my life and being. I feel low, that's my life and being. So we have a very convincing experience that our experience of ourselves is true. The fact of the matter is it is not your life and being. It seems to be your life and being. So when you think of your life and being, you use memory and you go, well, yes, I'm Bede and I was born in New Zealand and I had these experiences and I'm related, I'm Sylvia's husband and I've got all of these thoughts about myself. Now, we're not saying that thoughts are bad. What we're saying is that when we're enclosed in subjectivity, we're enclosed in a world of our own making. We're enclosed in a world of our own making, all right, that we take to be true. And what it also means is that when in subjectivity, everything we are seeing is not true. Everything. All right, we all clear? Are you all tracking with me so far? Right? Now, so, by the way, is there anybody here who feels that they don't suffer from the disease that Dayananda is pointing out here, that they're objective? It's just not true. You see, there's a big difference when the presence of reality comes into your life, right? Now, so if I'm looking at a snake, what is the only thing that can resolve the snake? What is it? Sorry?
Well, if you see what's really there, it's a rope, then
yes.
Yeah.
If the presence of the rope it comes into my mind, into my life, that will make the snake disappear, and it'll make the way of being that I'm being disappear. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? Because, you see, the great thing about Vedanta is this. You can disappear as a suffering individual. What Swami Dayananda calls resolving the ego into Ishvara, doesn't he? Resolving ourselves as an isolated, self-objective. You see, this is, who's ever heard of the expression self-objectification? It's me as an object. When I'm upset, I'm being an object. I'm being an angry person, and I know it. And by the way, it's your fault, Steve. Okay, not only do I know that I'm angry, I know who's causing it. Isn't that interesting? Because the default position is, in our ordinary life, is that people and things make us into something. Have you seen that? That's our default position. We are convinced. Who's ever said to themselves, this person is really pissing me off? Now, when we say that, do we believe it? Yes. And so we're having an experience of ourselves being a victim of other people's actions, aren't we? And we sincerely believe in the sincerity of our dramatization, don't we? Right? Delusional. So for Vedanta, what we mean by wisdom resolves subjectivity. Only wisdom can resolve subjectivity. And wisdom is not thinking good thoughts or spiritual thoughts or having it. Wisdom is the presence of reality coming into your life. Are you with me? Reality coming into your life. Who here has ever been speaking unkindly to their spouse and suddenly midstream they realize that they're being a jerk? Who here has done that? Okay, that they're being unkind. That's reality coming in, isn't it? That's the reality of God coming in as a new way of seeing. God doesn't, it's not like there's me here and God's kind of filling me up because I'm different from him. When reality comes into your life, you find yourself seeing in a different way. Are you with me? So that the wisdom of God is coming alive in you as a new way of seeing, And that new way of seeing sees what is. I am being a jerk. And you notice that as soon as you see that, you kind of go, you stop. Who's noticed that? Who's noticed that? See, this is how this life, light, and fullness that the Hindus talk about, or Satchitananda. When life obtains in us as light, wisdom, this is the transformative factor. Nothing else. The truth isn't the doctrine. The doctrine, it's not like the doctrine is true or false, because that's empirical. Is this true about facts? Is this a true theory about what's happening or a wrong theory? No. Doctrine is an instrument that can help you come alive to facts, to reality. An instrument. And because it's finite, it's got limitations. Every doctrine's got limitations. What hasn't got limitations is the light, light, and fullness that is God. Are we clear? So what happens is that when God comes into our life as wisdom, in other words, he gives you a new set of eyes, doesn't he? So and this is why we change. The way I see is the way I be. Have you noticed that as soon as you see that you're acting wrongly and it impacts you, you stop it, don't you? Does that make sense? Because wisdom governs you. So wisdom, if it's real, changes the way you're being. This is why Vedanta works. Because Vedanta is a vision. It's a way of seeing that can come alive in you as your way of seeing. You know, you'll be sometimes sitting there listening to Dayananda, and all of these notions that you've had all your life suddenly disappear. It's not because you were smart. You were just seeing as he was seeing. You see what I mean? So what the problem is that we are enclosed in subjectivity, right? So we need to reduce it. So first of all, we need to be able to truthfully look at our life. Now, the thing is that we need to see reality, that reality itself is therapeutic. Now, there's a downside to this, though. The Hindus accentuate non-harmfulness, don't they? Non-harmfulness. Now, we may not know, of course, how to be loving or to be patient or to be anything, right? But we do know how to knock it off. We do know harmfulness, and we can stop being harmful. Does that make sense? So the first way God becomes present in our life is a clear understanding that in terms of our actions, whether our actions what we're doing right now is kind or it's not. Does that make sense? Whether it's helpful or it's destructive. Do you see what I mean? So it's a very important thing that because we have a striving of Dharma inside us, we have a striving to be loving and caring, to be accepting and to take care of ourselves and other people. When we violate that, it's only in the context of Dharma do we actually see the reality of our behavior. Does that make sense? In terms of right and wrong. Now, if I suddenly realize I'm talking harshly to Sylvia, which of course I would never do because I'm such a wonderful, noble person, right? But if am I getting into spiritual idealism if I'm just simply seeing that I'm acting wrongly and then I knock it off? Is that spiritual idealism or is that reality?
Reality.
Yeah, it's not spiritual idealism. We're not trying to be nice people. If I'm trying to be a nice person, I'm involved in becoming, aren't I? I'm involved in trying to become a nice notion of myself. Now, who's ever heard the expression, all good comes from God? All good comes from God. When I knock off my harmfulness, and I see my harmfulness every day. Okay, I see my harmfulness every day. Right? Who here has ever experienced losing a sense of goodwill towards other human beings and to some degree become full of ill will? Who's ever done that? Who's ever seen that? Right. So when you fall away from love, which Dayananda meant by accepting, to that degree you become hostile and hateful, don't you? Does that make sense? When you fall away from caring, you become indifferent and you become callous. Now, it's extremely important. If the life of God is to come alive in us, if God is love and I'm being unloving, will I be able to see love? No, not possible. So this non-harmfulness is really good because it doesn't say be good. What does it say? Don't be harmful. Okay, don't be harmful. This sets the ground. Do you see what I mean? See, if I stop dramatizing impatience, if I stop dramatizing being impatient with people, what I will find is I've got control over my behavior, right? My conduct. Dayananda said we've got control, choice over action. I stop the dramatization of impatience, and then what happens is that gives the opportunity for patience to become alive in me as a way of being. That comes from above. That's a spiritual quality, isn't it? Okay? Is it mine? Is it mine? No.
No.
Because everything is given. But Dharma clears the road. Does that make sense? When I commit to Dharma, what happens is I'm starting to live in reality because I'm now looking at my conduct and I'm looking at it in terms of, is this conduct right or is it wrong? Two concepts that are not alike, that are denied these days. There's no such thing as right and wrong. It's all just simply socially constructed. Yeah. All right. So the thing is that by living a life of non-harmfulness, you see, if what determines my conduct is Dharma, then my conduct's not being determined by what people do to me, because my response is Dharma. How can I talk about freedom if I'm just simply, if people are causing how I'm reacting to them? How can I do that? How can I be free? The whole point of Vedanta is freedom, isn't it? Moksha, right? Now, so what we need is reality coming into our life. And so because Dharma is a striving of the heart, does that make sense? Dayananda says the dynamic form of the basic person is love and care. Now, luckily, because of the presence of that love and care, that will enable us to see when we're being unloving or unaccepting, and we'll be able to see when we're not being caring. Are you with me?
Yep.
Right? So it's actually very, very good. So what's happening is, because I've got a dharmic striving, that striving doesn't just sit there. It opens my eyes to a whole range of reality. The reality of how I can be harmful every moment, a lot of the time during the day. Does that make sense? Now, Christian said a very interesting thing about a year ago. He said, truth can set you free, but first it's going to piss you off. You remember him saying that? I thought that was funny. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What he means is the truth hurts. The truth goes against our subjectivity. Here I was being cruel, a little bit harsh, and talking to Sylvia, and I was feeling right, and I was feeling that she was such real so-and-so, right? What assaults that belief? What actually shows it up to be wrong? It's Dharma. So at the moment the light of Dharma comes into my life and shows me that I'm being a jerk, what happens to that whole, the way I'm seeing Sylvia and all of that stuff, what happens to it? In the presence of the light of Dharma, it resolves it. You with me? But what's happened is the light of reality is coming in. Reality isn't reality. Reality is extremely practical. The presence of God comes in your life in very practical ways. You see what I mean? So when I'm looking, who here has ever, when they're looking at other human beings, particularly political figures, who here has noticed that they can lose their kind eyes? Who's noticed that? But doesn't it feel juicy? Doesn't it feel good losing your kind eyes? Hey? The problem is it's subjectivity, because one of the greatest ways that God manifests in our life is a kind way of being. Would you agree with that? And we know what it's like. When we're being kind, we feel soft. We don't have any ill will towards people, and we have a kind manner that goes along with that kindness. Does that make sense? We know that. But this is why, again, if I'm not being kind, I'm not seeing reality. Are we clear here? If I am not seeing myself, other people in the world with kind eyes, have you noticed it when you're quietly contemplating, you're walking along the beach or the bay, which we saw and I walk along a lot? Do you notice that you become sort of soft? Who's noticed that? Basically, our mind becomes unpreoccupied and our heart becomes non-disturbed. Isn't that interesting? It's only in the presence of love can we see. You see, when Dayananda said love is acceptance, it's not me, I'm now going to be accepting. It's a state of being. He says it's an attitude born out of our understanding of God. It's a state of being. So when I'm being that accepting, in other words, my life and that accepting are one and the same, which is communion with God. Okay? I find myself soft. I find myself, my mind is clear and simple, and I have an undisturbed heart. What's wrong with that? It's good. Dayananda says it's finding our slot. This is what we need to live life, right? Now, and he gave a very interesting remedy for this, which I want to go over, which is what we're gonna look at now. And it's this. When we look at the word sat in English, in the English vernacular, we're talking about life. So God is life. Are we all clear on that? God is life. And in the presence of that life, life is also light. He's also fullness. Are we clear on that? Now, the question is, where is God available to be recognized and appreciated? Where? You see, if God isn't an object away from us, now I've told you that what happens is that the presence of God always obtains as a way of seeing, which is also a way of being. We're all clear on that. That's how God communicates his life to us, shares his life with us as a way of being. It's not like me and God. That's not, otherwise we get into dualistic knowledge, don't we? We make God into an object and he go, yep, he's there and he loves me and he cares for me, but sometimes he wants to punish me if I'm naughty or whatever it is. You know what I mean? But we're not talking about that. We're talking about awakening to the very life that is God. And this is a lot easier than we think. Like, for example, God obtains in us as Dharma, doesn't he? God obtains in us as a way of being where our minds are clear. We've got kind eyes. So the wonderful thing is that we can live the life of God as our life. But what we want to do is we want to have access to this because we want to get familiar with ourselves as a recipient of this life, don't we? Are we clear on this? Now, Dayananda had a very interesting thing. He said, an appointment with yourself is an appointment with the Lord. Excuse me? Appointment with yourself. Now, what does he mean by self? Does he mean, so when he says the Lord Christ's instruction is bring your mind to yourself and think of no other thing, do you think he was thinking about your idea of yourself? No. You see, the teaching of Vedanta is that the life of the individual is the life that is God, right? That's the teaching of Vedanta, isn't it? So, where do we find the life that is God? The life of the individual. Now, am I here as an individual? Yep. Do I have to go to, Dayananda said, do you have to go to the Himalayas to find God? Right? So, when you bring your mind to this sense of life and being, because basically what animates this body is life. Would you agree with that? When people die, something leaves. Right? So the very life that is God is emanating every aspect of yourself. Does it mean? Every aspect of yourself. Now, so there's a sense of life and being that is not because I'm seeing it's there. Oh, I'm consciousness, I'm wonderful, I'm spiritual and all that nonsense, right? We're not talking about that. There's a sense of life and being that is right here, right now as I am. There's a sense of life. It is not my thoughts about myself. It's because I am seeing it, it is there. Are you with me? It is there. Now, we're going to use something from the Carmelite sisters, if that's all right, because they have this understanding that what we want to do is we want to come into contact and appreciation with this life and being. Now, we can only be this life and being. You can't know it as an object. Are we all clear on that? That is not going to help, right? If I'm knowing as an object, I'm in subjectivity. Okay? You know how Dayananda says when you as thinker and you as doer are split? Subjectivity always means a split away from reality, right? We want to rest in reality, in the presence of reality. Where is that presence available for recognition and appreciation? As the very person, the life and being of the person that I am, right? Now, so what we're going to do is this. The instruction that Dayananda gave was, it's from the Lord Krishna to Arjuna, was bring your mind to yourself. I want you to see that. Bring your mind to your sense of life and being that's here and think of no other thing. In other words, we're not going to go away into any objects. If they come and go, that's fine, but we're not going to go away with them. Does that make sense? We're not trying to get rid of thinking. What we're trying to do is live the very life that is God. That's the whole point. That's the whole religious endeavor action, right? So what I want you to do is sit up and using the Carmelite thing, the sense of life and being is really below the neck. Now, where this helps, it helps a lot because behind our eyes is the thinking factory, right? The thinking factory is behind the eyes. You can feel it, can't you, when you're thinking and all that stuff? When you come back to a global sense of yourself, this global sense is here. Below the neck, like the Carmelites say. You know what I mean? That when they get taught contemplation, this is what they do. All right? But what we're going to do is we're going to just simply sit here like this, and we're going to just simply quietly come back to the actual sense of life and being. You can close your eyes open, doesn't matter. It helps to close your eyes because it stops the associations. We're just going to come back to the sense of life and being below the neck. That sort of the global feeling of life and being that's here. And we're going to just simply live as that. Dayananda says we need to learn to become familiar with ourselves as this. So we're just simply coming into direct contact with life by being it, not by thinking about it. No struggle. No thinking about it. Just simply being. I'm simply being the life and being I am. Because it's there, I see it. But not as an object away from me. I notice as I'm being, I'm also being aware, because sat is chit. It is not true because the scriptures say it. It is something we can appreciate. To be is to be aware. I also see, because I'm not being a this or a that, a happy person or a sad person, I appreciate a fullness. This is the existential understanding of Sat Chit Ananda. It's not something I say about myself. It is pointing and indicating what I am. What I am when I'm abiding in reality and as reality. No struggle, no trying. I notice that my mind is clear and simple. And I notice my heart is undisturbed. All subjectivity is resolved in being. The ego resolved into Ishvara. This is not self-improvement. It's an entirely different life. It's not produced by the past. It comes from above. This is the meaning of what Dayananda called nididhyasanam, or being contemplative. Not contemplating, being contemplative. And the object of the meditation and the subject of the meditation are one and the same. That's how he put it. The senses are still functioning. Thoughts might be happening. But I'm not lost in my senses or my thoughts. I'm rooted in being. I'm resting in the lap of Ishvara, as Dayananda says. God is always timelessly present. Okay. Amy, what did you notice? Can you speak into the mic, Amy?
Yes. I noticed stillness. There was stillness.
Mm-hmm.
There was, I had to open my eyes a couple of times because I felt sleepy.
Mm-hmm.
But I had these feelings today. This happens on holidays sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
that everybody's going away and I'm left home. I don't know if anybody's ever had that feeling,
Yeah.
but I didn't have that during your talk, and I didn't have that now. There's peace, and there's just being here,
Just
being
being.
in the life, just being in the
Yes.
life.
You see, notice how when the self-objectification resolves, an entirely different life comes into view, doesn't it? But there's no denial of anything here. But you're no longer caught up in seeing through thoughts. Like you don't become the thinking, and the thinking doesn't become you. What releases you from that is that you're rooted in Ishvara. That's
And
the only
there's
thing.
fullness there.
There's this fullness there. Yeah. All the rest is fluff. Do you know what I mean? It's just fluff. Do you see what I mean? So because
Yes.
so you're and notice how it's because it's there you're seeing it. It's not, you're not conjuring it up, are you? And when you are being, the only time we know the life that is God is when we're being the life that is God. That's knowing God. It's non-dual.
It's the given you have spoken about. It gets forgotten sometimes, but when I do remember it,
Yeah.
here it is. Here's
That's why the teaching's so important, because it shows you the value that you've basically got two choices. You can keep on, you're either living in your world or you're living in Ishvara's world.
Mhm.
Dayananda says there's got to be less of you and more of Ishvara, or less of you and more of God. But we don't want to understand that philosophically. It's very important to understand that immediately, non-mediated knowledge. When we see through symbols, it's mediated knowledge, isn't it?
Yes.
This or that, I know that. That's dualistic thinking. That's good, very, very good, Amy. So do you see how our problem, even though they all appear different, it's just subjectivity. When that subjectivity is resolved into Ishvara, in whatever form it is, the whole lot goes. You don't have to pull it all together. Right here, right now, as you are, you can resolve subjectivity. Very good, Amy. Probably.
Well, what you said about Dayananda's an appointment with God is an appointment with yourself. That became more appreciation for that point of view or that statement. Yeah.
Yep. There's no one like Dayananda, actually. The wonderful thing about him is he had a vision of God that he just made very practical. He says Ishvara is a fact to be appreciated. Do you know what I mean? God is a fact to be appreciated. He didn't spin beautiful, highfalutin spiritual words and all that stuff. He just unfolded a vision of God that you could live, and a vision of way of seeing people that you can live. You know what I mean? Like, it covers everything. But today we're just going into the core thing, because but we don't see its value unless we relate it to the subjectivity. Unless we see we suffer from the disease of that isn't our life. That subjective life is not our life. It is darkness, and it always involves non-caring and non-lovingness. Always. It's a destructive, horrible life. It doesn't seem that way because I'm all right. I'm a nice guy. There's nothing wrong with me. All of that. They're just thoughts. And they work. I can feel inflated. Very good, Bob. Darling.
But what I noticed was that I was more aware of what's going on all the time, but that I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
Like sitting on the chair, my breathing, thoughts coming and going. So it's kind of like, it's not as if I'm going into a different state or anything. It's not like that at all. It's more like I'm becoming aware of what normally happens, but I'm not aware of it.
Dayananda called that being alive to facts. So when you're being the aliveness to facts, you're different. Because to be is, Sat is Chit. That's a rule in Vedanta. Sat is Chit. So if you're being the life that is God, you're also being light. Does that make sense? So that God's light becomes your light. Awareness is not something I do. It's something that obtains, that comes.
It's like you fall into it.
Yeah. You're drawn into it, actually. I think the Shin people are right. God is constantly drawing us in. We just have to listen and respond. Yeah, very good. John. Can't hear you, John, because your mic's off. Your mic is off, John. Oh, yeah, good.
Now I'm good, yes?
Yep, you're good now.
You said earlier that God enters your life as wisdom.
Yeah.
And that and wisdom is knowledge that brings me to myself, to self,
Yes.
to being.
Yeah.
And when through a group or a meeting or study, wisdom is experienced, it's complete. It's Sat. It's I am that I am. And you kept using the word, I think you didn't use it as harmlessness, but the word that comes to mind is ahimsa, which is harmlessness.
Yes.
Do no harm. And that's something that we can strive to be.
Yeah, that's one that we don't have to do the positive. Notice how you just become, that was given, but you have to you've got to turn away from harmful things in order to prepare the ground. Yeah.
Yes.
And also, it's not absolute in the sense that wisdom is in one sense like a spectrum. Like, for example, I might only at the beginning be aware of Dharma, but then I might then start to be aware of falsity in the sense of subjectivity. So it's a spectrum, but what it does is because it's a way of seeing, it changes the way you're being. That's the thing about wisdom. But you are not changing yourself. The wisdom itself changes you because being can't help but declare itself, as Saint Hilliard said. Okay?
Yes.
All right.
Good. Yeah, very good.
Very good. We don't have to try to be, we just need to see straight. We need the eyes of wisdom. And we'll always know who's noticed that your eyes become soft, that you become kind. I'm not a kind person, but when I'm resting in God, I'm imbued with kindness. My life and kindness become one and the same. Very good. Bob. Yep.
Me?
Yeah, you, yep.
Part of me, I guess I was reminded that God is always fully functioning, and I'm going to just step a little bit further into it and say that even the subjectivity is God's doing in a certain sense, in that it's not that that contrast helps you clarify the knowledge that is already pre-existing inside you. That's all.
Absolutely.
So the knowledge of God is a given, actually, as it turns out. And it's not we don't know it in the way that we know other things. But we can become I guess it brought to my attention that is fully functional already, and that my subjectivity is a natural process in a sense that the subjectivity allows me to see it,
Yes.
right, in a sense, and it can be resolved. So
Yes.
it's actually the given is a very advantageous position that we're in for that reason, because God is always fully operational, and as we naturally and as drift off into our fantasies and judgments about life, that's part of this process that allows us to appreciate God further. That's all.
Yes. Metaphysically, what you're saying is that when Dayananda talks about a clay pot, every form, right, is contingent on the life that is God. So even when we see evil and war, we're not saying it's good, but first of all, for anything to have any be, that it is dependent on the be of God. It doesn't have its own be. Secondly, in the spiritual journey, if we don't see when we've fallen away, we can't turn. So we need both. So we need a dialectic. So the spiritual life is a dialectic. And then what happens is not that God creates evil, but when I convert my life into a yoga, suddenly subjectivity becomes highly useful, because I can see, like what you're saying, which is a very, very good point. So
thank you.
We don't condemn subjectivity. We just recognize it, that given that God is life, light, and fullness, and that when we have fallen away from that life, light, and fullness, the laws, by necessity, it can't help but be dark and miserable. So in one sense, because it's the operation of the laws, it's just the setup. So it is not something to be condemned, but it's actually a recognition. So the light of wisdom is actually revealing our condition, which has to happen for us to turn. So
it's something to be understood.
It's something to be understood, not to be judged morally. Oh, well, there I go with my subjectivity again. That doesn't help, because you don't have to do that. The Shin people have an idea that once you appreciate the fact that you're actually embraced and grasped by this wisdom, compassion, you might fall away, but it's grasped but never forsaken. It's like a rubber band. The more you pull away, and then suddenly, bang, you pull back, and then you're pulled back. So it's very important, that dialectic, that kind of the difference between my life and the life that God is continually giving me. Like what you say is extremely useful, because without that we couldn't move. Very good, Bob. Brother, the sinner.
Okay, Bede. Well, I'm just impressed. There's so
I'm
much
jealous
wisdom.
about that hair. I'm just so jealous about that hair. You know, I compare myself unfavorably and start to feel a little bit deflated. Anyway.
If I could share it with you, I would.
Okay.
So,
maybe you could cut it off and send it to me, and I could attach it here with some glue.
I could do that.
Okay.
Well, the little meditation we had, it was so calming and peaceful. I felt like I was resting in reality, and there were no thoughts. Yep. And then I was starting to see this is almost like having an appointment with God. I'm having an appointment with myself, and it was very peaceful. I like what Bob said. And then I was thinking how the contrast of what I was experiencing yesterday. We've been on this really hard project, and generally I've been having a good attitude. Yesterday I felt this anxiousness, and when I was doing that, I was kind of getting agitated, and I recognized that I was being harmful to myself, because I had this anxious attitude towards myself. And I think that's really interesting, the Dharmic point, because that's sort of like a signpost that you have fallen out of the lap of Vishwar. So I was being harmful to myself, and even yesterday I saw myself being short with Bob. And it was like, I mean, I love him more than almost anybody. And so I witnessed God. I mean, I was telling myself, I've really fallen out. but I couldn't do anything about it. I just recognized I have fallen, and I'm anxious, and there was nothing I could do. Now, so I said, I'm just going to rest here and just be here. And I did notice maybe 3 or 4 hours later when we were riding home, I kind of exclaimed, wow, thank God for today. Thank God that we have this prasad to be able to do this work, and these things are coming up. So I really like this thing about the Dharma and the harmfulness, because the harmfulness to me is a signpost that we've fallen away. I guess that's all I have to say.
Yeah. When the characteristic of subjectivity is always the friction between the resistor and the resisted.
Yep.
Even when we get caught up in fantasy, it's actually a resistance against reality. Mm-hmm. The thing is that, like what you say, is that when we find ourselves in a state, when we understand that there's another way of looking at God, in the sense that God is this warmth and light that's always embracing us, right? Mm-hmm. Like when you notice how when you just come back to yourself and you remained and you didn't do anything but just remained, but when you appreciate the fact that Ishvara is away from no aspect of your experience, right? That he says this is the basis of self-acceptance. So when you're in that stuffed up state where you're angry, resentful, self-condemning, that's okay. What happens is when they say open your heart, have you ever heard that expression, open your heart? Yeah. Your heart is what you're being at any one moment. And sometimes your heart is dominated and enclosed in a state of being that's horrible, right? So when you come to God, instead of resisting it, trying to think about it, trying to get rid of it and all that nonsense, you open up that pain and misery to the presence of God and simply wait. Because the warmth will lift your heart and draw you. You can't disidentify. Reality disidentifies you. Remember the snake when you see the rope? So you're drawn out of that painful condition so your heart becomes composed. And also, when you're preoccupied, I'm such an idiot, and all that, your mind becomes simple and clear. This is what you could call fruits of the spirit, if you like. This is the existential verification. But it involves no denial. So this is why, people say, I've got to become accepting. Well, we're not separate apart from God, we're not accepting, and we can't become accepting. What happens is acceptance is an attitude born out of the understanding of Ishvara. So if you take Dayananda's thing that every aspect of your experience there is Ishvara's presence. So Ishvara's presence is right with the resentment, the hatred, the self-disappointment, all of that. It changes the whole game, Steve. Mm-hmm. All right, it's a beautiful. No one teaches this like him. Yeah. His teaching on God is the most magnificent thing. All right, that's lovely, Stephen. Kevin.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Good. I find it helpful to just bring the attention below the head, in the heart lungs area. Yeah.
Away from the thinking factory behind the eyes.
Absolutely. I find that helpful.
Yep.
Also found it interesting when you're sort of talking about the dialectic of pleasant experiences or an unpleasant experience of subjectivity, that the setup is that because God didn't make us robots, we have free choice, and and without us choosing the true and the good, we're not learning. We'd just be robots if that wasn't available to us. So that's quite important. And I found it very striking. I found it very striking when you said, when I'm living my life in subjectivity, it's never kind. It can appear to be, but it's not. It's just self-absorbed, love of self, love of the world, and I'm full of it.
And you'll have nice notions about yourself that'll be consoling.
Yeah, and I'm idolizing myself as somehow a nice person. Yeah.
If you want to know what life's like, read Ecclesiasticals. That really shows it all. It shows what subjectivity is. So when the discrimination between being subjective and objective is the discrimination between false and true. And it's such a beautiful thing that like what Bob was saying, you know, without the recognition, how can you turn away from something if you're not aware of it? So this dialectic between the two, we have this beautiful saying in our Western scriptures, choose ye this day which master you're going to serve. Have you heard that one? So you either serve yourself or serve God. But serving God isn't like a slave or whatever. It's actually a new life where you actually want to be kind because you're filled with kindness. Does that make sense? It's not like me obeying some external agency and all of that nonsense. All right, that's good, Kevin. Lawrence, nice to see you again. I love the hoodie. You look like a criminal.
I guess you could say I am, because I've been filled with thoughts about myself and the world. So I guess that comes with the territory. I noticed in that exercise, you know, I closed my eyes and I didn't really try, you know, the prompt was to kind of get out of your head and come into your body. And I noticed that in doing so,
into the life that's animating the body. Yep.
Right. Right. And, you know, I closed my eyes and I was breathing, and, you know, just, I kind of felt like this kind of dissolving where I was just kind of resting into relaxation, and, you know, the mind is still continuing to just go and go, but it was almost like it was just like on this track that was playing, and it was not like I could push a button and stop it. It's going to continue playing no matter what, but I didn't have to identify with that as having any sort of meaning or any implication as to who or what I am. And I like, and kind of like what Bob was going, what Bob was saying, when, you know, it's this, all of the experience that we have, positive or negative, about ourselves or about the world or about other people, that's all within God. You know, we can make interpretations about it, about how it relates to us, or about what it means to us. But really all of that it's like giving us perspective into what is real, even if what appears to be real is not real. It still has the, you know, it's like I can still, all of that can be going on, because that's going to go on regardless. I'm still going to have like positive or negative feelings about myself or about the world or about the people around me, but that doesn't have to be determining my state of being.
Your way of being, no.
My way of being, right. Or like the feelings that I have about whatever may be going on. And yeah, in that exercise, I've been really stressed out with a lot of different things going on in a lot of different areas of my life. And, you know, in that exercise, as I found with most of the times when we do these exercises on your calls, it's just like, it's like that dissolving, where it's kind of like returning to that standard, like programming, or that it's like that, like the operating system that animates all of us, you know. And it's easy for me to get caught up in the things that are going on around all that and build layers and layers on top of that. And then in that moment, it's like all of that gets dissolved and pushed away. And it's not like it's not there. It's just not there in a way that is determining my state of being. And that is, you know, and just being able to come back to that and remembering that all of this is really a gift, you know, like the opportunity to be able to have this kind of like personal struggle and these challenges, that is a blessing, because it gives reference to what is real, you know. And then as soon as you are immersed and like confronted by what reality is, it's like the most natural, simple things that there could possibly be. And it's immediately recognized. It's like, oh yeah, this is, you know, it's the most natural thing that there is. And yeah, I mean, I think that this there's like this perception that I have about like doing everybody wants to be like a good person and live a good life and be treat others with respect and kindness, and there's nothing really there's nothing that I can do to change like I can't necessarily change things about myself, but I can be present to just the more that I the closer that I get to just being like my true nature and just being operating in a simple manner, the more I realize that everything that I learned or I thought I knew is less real than it's not. It doesn't bear as much importance. It's like the ideas that I have about who or what I am are less important when you're in the presence of like this calm contemplative disposition.
Yes.
And that's, and when I'm in that, when we do these exercises and when I close my eyes and I'm like, oh, I can actually feel this like melting away of all of this, the things that I thought that are not that way.
Exactly. The things that you thought won't. And it's not true. And the reason it works, Lawrence, is that when we're rooted in being, we're no longer rooted in our thoughts, feelings, and appearances, our falsity. So that melting feeling is what Dayananda calls resolving the ego into Ishvara. In our Western scriptures, we have the saying, God is love. Remember Dayananda's understanding of love, which is being accepting. God is love. Those who are abiding in love are abiding in God, and God's abiding in him. The only other thing I'd say is that we always have functional life and its demands, and what Dayananda says about that, do as best you can. What Vedanta deals with is that you can have a freedom that you can take refuge in God irrespective of the results of our actions, because we want so when the results of our actions are not determining us, then we can be free. Okay? That's very good, brother. That's very, very, very good. Arya.
My baby.
So I've had a unique experience. Maybe it's not unique, but unique for me recently, where I've been experiencing a lot of kind of intense life experiences and stress, and it came to a point where I felt like it got so extreme that I was forced to either like succumb to everything going on and just be left in misery, or just instead go the opposite, which is just total acceptance and surrender to it. And it was almost like things got so intense that like I kind of like moved on to the other side, because I had no choice. Is like I can't just like disintegrate into misery, so I have to just accept it. And there was a certain feeling of just peacefulness and surrender amidst things feeling really chaotic, and that seeming contradiction, I mean, not really contradiction, but being able to feel at peace when everything was like more stressful than I had experienced in the past was very strange and also very comforting. And I had a very strong sense of who I really am and not being totally enmeshed in what's going on around me. And so I was experiencing that and feeling really grateful for it. But then I also found fluctuations in that. So things continue to be difficult, and you're on less sleep, or something comes up and triggers you. And so it's not necessarily lasting all the time, which I guess I wouldn't expect it to be. But I have also found, myself dipping back into just getting frustrated by things and feeling grief and feeling, stressed out. And I have found myself thinking like, oh, wow, I really don't want to feel this way, but also hearing myself say that and not necessarily trying to change it, but more so just be like, oh, I need to feel this. This is coming up because it's something I need to feel. What's the only way that I can go on? So I don't know, when I'm able to have that experience where it's something as difficult as happening, and I'm like, oh, I kind of wish I wasn't feeling this, but I know I have to, and so I'm going to let myself feel it. I think there's something really powerful in those moments. And then I know we've talked about having that experience as a gift, like being able to experience those feelings is the only way that you're going to continue to progress in your life. Not hiding from it and just embracing feeling those things is the only way that you end up finding your own peace amidst the chaos around you, which is what I've also been experiencing. And so, yeah, that's just been a practice for me, is being grateful for those things that come up. I don't always, sometimes it's like I get sucked into it, but witnessing myself being accepting of the struggle and finding peace and knowing that those feelings are exactly right and part of the process, and not resisting them, and knowing that I have to go through it. And so it's been a transformative process. That's what I've been, I suppose,
Right.
singing myself.
Well, it's like
thinking about.
It's like what Bob says, right? You need the dialectic, because you see, the being separate and apart from God is like being a withering branch cut off from the vine. It's miserable and it's cold, right? But our egoism, all of our identifications, all of our the depth of our vanity, the depth of our ignorance is there. But what happens is, when we convert our life into karma yoga, we're going to use everyday life as a means for transformation. In other words, to go home to God. That means that by necessity, you're going to, each time, everything's going to be revealed. Pain's going to be revealed, fears are going to be revealed, which is fantastic, actually. Doesn't sound like it, but because when they're revealed, they can be resolved into Ishvara. So this moment, I resolve into Ishvara. This moment, I resolve into Ishvara. As we keep doing this, things get lighter and lighter and lighter. It might still get, you might go into the very depths of inverted commas hell. Some people call it the dark night of the soul. Have you ever heard the expression? So it's what, you know how Dayananda says the whole spiritual life is being alive to facts? We're interested in being alive to facts, not trying to be good or to be so-called happy or feel good about ourselves. Because reality has a therapeutic effect on us, but it comes, each moment is a revelation of our identification and our helplessness, which we then resolve into Ishvara the next moment. So we're going to always have this dialectic, I believe. Do you know what I mean? But that's not important. The important thing is to live a truthful life, but with the understanding that our place of refuge is not in the world or in other people, but our only refuge is in being or in God. And the more we understand that, we won't depend upon our trying to change. We need to functionally do what we can in terms of best we can in terms of function. But our happiness doesn't come from whether we succeed at that or not. Sometimes that's a hard thing to understand. But the thing is that real happiness is above the opposites. You know how things go right, things go wrong, things are uncomfortable, things are comfortable. All of the spiritual literature talks about this state above the opposites, right? That when we're resting in being, that's available to us when things are going right and also when things are going wrong. But the more we learn to when they talk about moksha, which is freedom while living. So it's being rooted in freedom while we're living. But that freedom is not, I've got freedom. I am being the freedom. Does that make sense? I am being the, does that make sense, Arya? And so the main thing is that if you for the next month, every time you notice yourself in friction, you know that feeling of fightingness, right? We get caught up in the story, but we don't see the fightingness. As soon as you see that fightingness, that's subjectivity. Because the structure of subjectivity, the nature of it's notional, the structure is resistance, between the resistor and the resisted. We think the resisted is the problem, but when we resolve the resistor disappears too. We just got facts to face and respond to. Normally, we don't just have facts to face and respond to. We've got these horrible situations that are giving us a trouble and all of that stuff. You see, so all of that world, it's horrible and I can't stand, it's too difficult, comes from our subjectivity. When subjectivity is reduced, and the last thing I'd like to say is that when we are composed in ourselves, when our heart's non-disturbed and our mind is clear, we can act more intelligently even on the functional level. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Intelligence becomes available to us, right? So that's important too. And so it's very valuable resting in Ishvar's lap while we're living our life, living this, what he called a prayerful attitude. Okay, well, nice to see all of you again, as usual. Nice to see you, Bob. Yep.
Thank you. Likewise.
Yep. And look after yourselves, and we'll see each other in about a month's time. Last Friday of every month. Okay.
Thank you so much, Bede.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you, Bede. God bless you.
Thank you, everybody.
See you all.
See you, Amy. See you, Bob.
Bye.
See you, John. Bye-bye.